The relentless howl of the wind sliced through the night, wrapping the small, weather-beaten cabin in a shroud of biting cold and unyielding danger. Inside, Nayeli stood firm, her eyes sharp despite the exhaustion that etched her face. With 2 young children clinging close, she embodied the fierce spirit needed to survive the unforgiving frontier. A solitary Apache widow, battling nature's wrath and the shadow of ever-present threats that haunted their remote refuge. Around the cabin, the storm raged unchecked. Heavy raindrops hammered the earth, turning the surrounding land into slick mud. Thunder growled from distant heavens, echoing over the ridge where gnarled trees bent like supplicants to the tempest's fury. The faint scent of wet pine mixed with the acrid tang of firewood, struggling against the damp air. Darkness blanketed the valley, broken only by the shivering dance of light from the cabin's hearth inside. Nayeli moved quietly, yet decisively, her years of hardship sharpening every motion. Her 2 children, silent except for occasional shivers, huddled near the hearth, watching their mother with wide eyes that mirrored both trust and a flicker of fear. The weight of responsibility pressed on her shoulders, heavier than any storm. Each day was a struggle against hunger, cold, and isolation. Each night, a test of her courage to shield her family from the harsh wilderness and the unseen dangers lurking beyond the cabin's thin wooden walls. Suddenly, a faint noise cut through the tempest's roar, the soft thud of a body against the muddy earth outside. Nayeli's breath hitched, instincts flaring. Grabbing a worn blanket, she stepped outside into the rain-washed night. Under the relentless sheets of rain, a figure sprawled just beyond the porch's meager shelter. It was a man, pale and battered, his expensive clothes soaked and torn, a stark contrast to the rugged landscape. Ethan Caldwell, a wealthy cowboy from distant lands, lay gasping, his life hanging by a fragile thread. Nayeli's mind battled the immediate peril. To bring this stranger in was to risk everything. Her family, their fragile sanctuary, threatened by enemies unknown who might follow. Or by the simple fact that harboring a stranger could invite ruin. Yet the dying fire in Ethan's eyes sparked a fierce spark of compassion within her, a call she could not deny. With measured resolve, she lifted him gently and dragged him inside, each creak of the door a toll of mounting danger. As Nayeli tended to Ethan, wrapping his wounds with practiced hands, the cabin filled with a fragile intimacy born of desperate hope. The children watched silently as the stranger's labored breaths mingled with the steady crackle of the fire. Ethan's hazel eyes fluttered open, sharp pain and confusion clouding his gaze. Slowly, awareness dawned. The man understood the peril his presence brought to this hidden refuge, the invisible chains tying his survival to Nayeli's bravery. The tension hung thick in the air as Ethan's lips parted, attempting words that stalled beneath the weight of looming threats. Nayeli's face held calm strength, but inside, a storm of fear and determination raged. This moment marked a shift, a fragile alliance forged in the crucible of desperation, where hope and fear walked hand in hand. As Ethan's pulse steadied, yet restlessness twisted his brow, he realized the cost his survival might impose on Nayeli and her children. Outside, the storm's fury showed no sign of abating, but a darker shadow loomed, one born not of nature, but of the choices that now bound their fates together. Many who walk these forgotten trails whispered that fate, or YouTube's tricky algorithm, sometimes strips away their subscriptions without warning. Before the next perilous path unfolds and a new twist is revealed, take a moment to check below and make sure you're still counted among our ranks, so you don't lose the thread of this tale. Don't miss the voices echoing from this valley. Verify your subscription now and join our saga. Nayeli dipped her fingers swiftly into the small wooden bowl, pressing crushed herbs and leaves onto Ethan's battered arm. The fire's flicker cast shadows that danced across the cramped cabin walls, mingling with the tension that now hung thick in the air. The children, silent yet watchful, knelt nearby, holding handfuls of dried roots and carefully chosen plants, assisting their mother's precise ministrations. Outside, the storm's rage had calmed to a mere whisper, but inside, a quieter tempest brewed, one of unease and wary trust. Ethan's breath came ragged and shallow, but his eyes, sharp and restless, refused to settle. His hand twitched, fingers curling around the rough cloth, swaddling his wounds. Every movement betrayed the simmering conflict within him. The sharp edge of a man unused to dependency, cloaked in years of suspicion, and hardened by a world far removed from this solitary cabin in Apache land. "You tend well to wounds," his voice rasped, carrying the weight of disbelief as much as gratitude. His gaze swept the room, landing warily on Nayeli. "I never imagined such care from Apache hands." Nayeli met his glance. Steadily, her eyes unyielding while concealing a well of guarded caution. "Survival does not ask where your blood flows," she said softly. "It only asks if you're willing to live." Her hands never faltered, wrapping the final bandage with patient strength. The children exchanged furtive glances, sensing the fragile bridge being laid between two worlds. Nayeli's eldest, a boy of 10 with eyes as keen as her own, fetched a clay cup filled with warm water infused with bitter sage, an ancient remedy for pain. He offered it to Ethan, who hesitated before accepting the gesture, a silent truce forming amid unspoken fears. Ethan swallowed, the warmth coursing through his parched throat. Yet beneath the surface, the embers of distrust flickered. "Why risk hiding me? Those who seek me are not kind. They bring fire and death, and now you invite danger to your doorstep." Nayeli's jaw tightened, a shadow passing over her face. "Leaving you to die means leaving tomorrows empty for my children, and no harm will come to them while I still breathe." Her voice bore the weary weight of someone who has lost much to the bitter wind of this land. A flicker of surprise crossed Ethan's features, mingled with respect. Yet the tension remained unbroken. His mind raced, not just with pain, but with the realization of the peril his presence now brought to this quiet corner of the world. Hours passed in tense silence. The bedside rituals repeated, herbal poultices, careful bandaging, whispered prayers to ancestors long gone. Slowly, Ethan's breathing steadied, and his restless gaze softened, though his mind remained shackled to shadows of doubt and peril. Outside the cabin, the first chill whispers of dawn curled through the trees. The children stirred, their youthful energy undiminished despite the long night. Nayeli watched them, a surge of maternal determination blooming beneath her calm exterior. This fragile peace would not last. Suddenly, a distant, unmistakable sound cut through the morning hush, the thundering beat of hooves pounding against hardened earth. Nayeli's eyes snapped toward the window, narrowing as she scanned the horizon. A cloud of dust rose beyond the tree line, the silhouettes of riders emerging like ghosts out of the waking light. Her heart tightened. Men, many of them. Her voice dropped, barely above a whisper. Ethan's head lifted, the blood in his veins stirring anew at the sound. His eyes sharpened with urgency. "They've found me." The room seemed to constrict around them, the unspoken question thickening the air. What price would Nayeli pay to protect this man? And what dangers would these horsemen bring to her family? The children who clung to every scrap of safety in these remote hills. Nayeli rose slowly, muscles taut, but her resolve solid. Her hand gripped the worn handle of a hunting knife hanging nearby, a silent reminder that mercy here was as much a shield as a sword. Ethan caught sight of it and met her gaze, a tumult of appreciation and guilt flickering within his eyes. "We must move you," she said firmly. "This place, your sanctuary, will be hunted soon." Ethan struggled to sit upright, wincing as pain lanced through his side. "Where? To what end?" "To safety where they cannot find you. The land gives many hiding places, but time is our enemy." Nayeli's voice was steady as iron, masking the storm of fear she fought to keep at bay. The children began gathering their few belongings, dried meat, blankets, a small leather pouch containing precious tobacco. The gravity of their actions seemed to press down upon them. Even their small faces bore the solemnity of hard-learned survival. As they prepared to abandon the fragile cabin that had sheltered them, Ethan's gaze lingered on the hearth's fading glow, then on Nayeli, the woman whose courage defied the harshness of the world. Both knew too well. A fragile alliance had formed, built on necessity, but forged in respect and fragile hopes. Yet outside, the world moved with relentless intent. The sound of the horses grew louder, accompanied now by voices calling orders, commands dripping with malice. Nayeli peered through a crack in the doorframe, spotting the grim faces of the riders, men relentless and determined. Her breath caught. "They're close, too close," she whispered. The safety of her children and the life she'd fought to protect trembled on the edge of a knife. The horizon darkened, not only with storm clouds, but with the gathering threat that no prayer or poultice could heal. In that moment, the fragile cabin became a beacon, one that might save or doom them all. The sun had barely crested the jagged horizon when Nayeli led Ethan and her two children through the narrow, winding path that disappeared into the rocky desolation of the canyon. The air was sharp, carrying the dry scent of sage and the faint echo of distant coyote howls. Every step was a test for Ethan's wounded leg, but Naeli's patient guidance steadied him. As the children hurried ahead, their youthful curiosity mingled with tense vigilance. "This land," Naeli said quietly, glancing back, "is both a shield and a trap. It hides secrets no man who does not know it can find." Her voice was soft but firm, layered with the wisdom of generations who had survived countless harsh seasons. "You must learn to see with more than your eyes, Ethan." He nodded, wincing as pain throbbed sharply beneath the coarse bandage. "I've spent my life chasing land and wealth, never once thinking how the earth holds memories." His gaze flickered over the red and ochre cliffs that rose like ancient sentinels. "You're teaching me a language I've long ignored." The boy at Naeli's side, quiet Miguel, pointed to a cluster of scrubby brush. "See those plants? They mark water beneath the surface." The girl, Sol, carefully scraped away loose dirt, revealing a shallow pool reflecting the pale sky. Naeli smiled briefly, a flicker of relief, then crouched beside Ethan. "Drink, but not too much. The body must be coaxed, not overwhelmed." As Ethan bent forward, the cool water freshened his parched throat like a whispered promise. Around them, the canyon's raw beauty seemed to stand still, as if holding its breath for what would come next. Later, beneath the high ledge where shadows stretched long and the sun filtered through golden dust, Ethan's voice broke the silence. "They attacked me near my ranch weeks ago. Men paid to see me dead. Agiotas, ruthless mercenaries, friends turned foes. My lands, the riches, the documents I carry, they're a threat to powerful interests." His eyes clouded with the weight of secrets. "And now a hired gun roams these parts, a pistolero with a cold heart, sent to finish the job." Naeli's eldest, Miguel, tightened his grip on a carved wooden knife, a symbol of his inheritance. "Then this place, this canyon, will be the last they expect, and the first they'll dread." The tension in the words was real, born of a youthful courage sharpened by hardship. The sun dipped lower, painting the world in blood-red hues. The small band settled near a copse of scrub oak, the children silently gathering brush for a fire. Naeli's hands moved with practiced grace, crafting a shelter of branches and hides that blended into the rocky landscape. She glanced sideways at Ethan, whose jaw clenched as he wrestled with a pride bruised as deeply as his flesh. "You don't belong here," Ethan confessed, voice raw. "Not truly. And yet you protect me, stranger that I am." He looked away, ashamed of the vulnerability he could neither hide nor deny. "Why risk so much for a man like me, in a world that's torn us all apart?" Naeli's gaze held steady, fierce yet tender. "Because every life saved enriches the land itself. Because death breeds only more death. And maybe, just maybe, because I see in you not a stranger, but a man who hasn't yet lost his honor." A whisper of wind circled them, carrying the scent of desert blooms and distant thunder. The fire sparked alive, casting flickering light on faces tired but unbroken. Suddenly, movement, a figure emerging from the cracked shadows of the rocks. Naeli's hand went to the knife at her belt. Miguel dropped into a crouch, eyes sharp as a hawk's. Ethan stiffened, heart hammering. The man who stepped forward was gaunt, his sun-beaten face framed beneath the broad rim of a battered hat. Yet it was his voice that cut sharper than any blade. "You're running out of time," he said coldly, lips curling into a cruel smile. "Word travels fast. The pistolero ain't far behind, and a messenger arrives bearing darker tidings." The firelight trembled as Nayeli's eyes narrowed. The man's presence was a cruel echo from Ethan's hunted past, a harbinger of the storm looming ever closer. "What news?" Ethan asked, his voice low but steady despite the knot in his gut. The stranger's eyes gleamed with grim warning. The danger's no longer just shadow and chase. There are wolves in places you believed safe, rivals tightening the noose, allies lost or turned. You hold enemies closer than you know. Nayeli tightened her grip on her knife, the lines of her face hardening like the stones around them. Her children huddled nearer, sensing the rising tempest in the words spoken. The canyon swallowed the stranger's words. A heavy silence fell, broken only by the crackling fire and the distant rumble of unseen thunder. Ethan looked at Nayeli, the weight of unspoken trust and unresolved fears crossing the space between them. The fragile shelter they had built in these stones suddenly felt too small, too frail, beneath the weight of what was yet to come. The pistolero's shadow lengthened, not just in myth or rumor, but in the flesh now stalking ever closer. Outside, the dying light faded as night crept forward, weaving darkness with the promise of trials deeper than the canyon itself. A messenger, unexpected and unwelcome, had arrived, and the danger was now no longer a distant cry, but a roar at their very door. The firelight in the small camp flickered weakly, shadows bending and stretching over the faces of those gathered beneath the gnarled branches. Nayeli sat apart, her gaze steady but haunted, as the weight of what she had invited into their lives settled heavy on her shoulders. Ethan's presence had sparked a tempest far larger than the storm that rattled their cabin days before. A storm woven from fear, distrust, and the hard truths of the land. Now, at the crossroads of compassion and survival, Nayeli faced a battle not just for flesh and blood, but for the fragile trust between worlds. A soft rustling announced the arrival of a figure on horseback, dust clinging to his worn garb like a second skin. The old warrior emerged from the dusk, Tawisi, a distant kin to Nayeli, his face carved by decades under the unforgiving sun, eyes shadowed with hard-earned wisdom and a deep suspicion. His horse's tired hooves stirred the earth as he dismounted, the prairie silence broken by his measured steps. "You have put us all in danger," Tawisi said, his voice gravelly with age and caution. "This stranger's presence will bring fire to our doorsteps. The clan cannot afford such risk." Nayeli's fingers tightened around the hilt of her knife resting at her side. "He is wounded, and he would have died without my aid. Would you let family perish because of fear?" The old man's gaze flicked to Ethan, who sat stiffly near the campfire, his jaw set with quiet resolve, eyes flickering with unease and guilt alike. "Hurt or not, he walks in shadows, not ours to bear. The patrols watch, the enemies move swiftly. We must think of the children and those who rely on this land. The balance must not tip." Ethan's voice cut through the tension, steady, despite the pain etched in every movement. "I'm no enemy here. Though I carry the troubles of my own making, I pledge to stand with you, to bear whatever burden is needed to keep your people safe." Nayeli watched the slow unfolding of respect between the two men, a wary dance, cautious steps toward understanding. She saw the flicker of hesitation in Tawisi's eyes, the knot of mistrust loosen just a fraction. But the weight of unspoken doubts remained, like an unseen current pulling beneath still waters. "We prepare," Ethan added, voice low and deliberate. "If threats come, I will help defend your home. I owe you that much." Miguel, ever watchful, stood by his mother's side, the carved wooden knife in his hand a symbol of their heritage and determination. Words can only carry us so far. Actions will speak when the time comes. Nayeli nodded, relief and anxiety twisting together in her chest. The border between mistrust and alliance was a narrow path, often perilous and uneven. But tonight, the flickering flame of hope stubbornly caught hold. As darkness deepened, the camp settled into tense preparation. Nayeli led the children in quietly gathering driftwood and stones, crafting rudimentary barriers and sharpened stakes hidden beneath thick brush. Ethan moved with surprising strength, assisting with the heavy tasks despite his wounds, sweat beading on his brow under the moon's pale gaze. The night air was sharp, carrying the scent of juniper and distant rain, the hills wrapping them in an uneasy embrace. Nayeli's mind raced over the possibilities. The old warrior's warning echoed like thunder in her ears. Suddenly, a distant glow ignited the night, a ring of flames carefully arranged in a circle around their camp, the unmistakable signal of a hostile party intent on encirclement. "They are close," Nayeli whispered, the cool air nodding her stomach. "The pistolero and his men have found us. The fire, it's a warning and a trap." Ethan's hand instinctively moved toward the rifle, slung low across his back, eyes sharp as steel. "This night will decide more than just my fate." His gaze met Nayeli's, the unspoken truth hanging between them. There was no turning back from this moment. Miguel and Sol gathered closer, silent but unafraid, their young faces alight with the wild courage their mother had raised them with, fierce as the desert sun. The circle of flames cast dancing shadows, menacing and alive, promising an onslaught that would test every ounce of their resolve. Nayeli's voice was low but unwavering. "We fight not only for one life, but for our future, the children, our people. Tonight we stand as one." The crackle of dry brush igniting grew louder. The air pulsed with tension, and the scent of burning wood mingled with the dusty breath of horses approaching fast. "The night belongs to those who dare," Ethan murmured, loading his rifle. The old warrior Tawisi stepped forward, his silhouette framed by firelight, a fierce and silent sentinel, ready to defend kin and honor. Nayeli's heart beat fierce and steady beneath the weight of the coming storm. The fragile alliance, forged in desperation, now bore the full heat of an unforgiving test. Above them, the stars hid behind a veil of smoke and ash. Outside, the fiery ring tightened its grip, and the battle for survival drew near. The pistolero and his men were at the threshold, closing in under the cloak of night. The relentless daylight bore down upon the trio as they navigated the jagged terrain. Vast stretches of scrubland, giving way to rocky rises and narrow deserts that yawned like ancient scars upon the earth. Nayeli, her eyes scanning the horizon with practiced sharpness, led the way with unyielding resolve. Her children, Miguel and Sol, moved beside her with quiet determination, the weight of responsibility pressing down on their young shoulders. Ethan, visibly weakened, but stubbornly persevering, clung to Nayeli's support, each step a mixture of pain and newfound trust. The heat radiated off the cracked ground as the sun reached its unforgiving zenith, the air shimmering in waves that distorted the distant mesa tops. Every movement was measured, every pause born from exhaustion and constant vigilance. Ethan's breathing was uneven, but the sharpening bond between them was undeniable, a fragile thread weaving their fates closer with every mile. Suddenly, the stillness fractured. Shouts echoed faintly from the ridge above, harsh voices cutting through the dry wind. Nayeli's head snapped up, eyes narrowing like a hawk's. They pursue us yet, following the trail we hoped to erase. Her hand instinctively went to the worn handle of a knife strapped at her waist. Not for show, but for survival. Miguel crouched low, his gaze scanning the barren stretch ahead. "There's no hiding on the open plain," he said with quiet fear, voice steady beyond his years. "But in the canyons, the land can swallow a man whole." Sol's fingers brushed against the coarse bark of a creosote bush as she stepped softly, listening to the subtle shifts in the desert's breath. "We must move fast. They are relentless." Her eyes, sharp as her mother's, flicked toward Ethan, a silent question hanging between them. Can he endure the chase still? Ethan gritted his teeth, forcing a nod despite the throb from his wound. "This land is strange to me, its language foreign, but I'm learning to listen." A flicker of humility softened his gaze. "And you all have taught me courage I forgot I possessed." As they crept toward a narrow ravine, flanked by towering sandstone cliffs, the terrain shifted from open hostility to protective embrace. The canyon's shadow offered temporary refuge, a maze of rock and shade where the pursuer's advantage dimmed. Nayeli signaled for silence, every muscle taut with anticipation. The quiet was shattered moments later by the distant thunder of horses, the clatter of boots, and the sinister whistle of a pistolero known for his ruthless efficiency, trailing behind his men like a curse. The sound drew closer, relentless as the desert sun. "We cannot outrun them forever," Nayeli whispered, "but we can outthink. Follow me." Guided by the fragile knowledge passed down through generations, she wove through narrow ledges and hidden alcoves, deftly avoiding the beat of hoofbeats and the glint of rifles in the harsh light. Ethan struggled, his strength waning, but the children's hands steadied him, their trust becoming his lifeline. Several times the group halted, hearts pounding in the oppressive heat, breaths shallow and quick, as shadows flitted past their concealed positions. Ethan's eyes held growing respect for Nayeli's intimate command of the land, and for the bravery of her children, who, despite their youth, moved with calculated precision. During one tense respite beneath a twisted juniper, Nayeli knelt beside Ethan, pressing cool water to his parched lips and tracing her fingers over the raw wound at his side. You fight not just with muscle, but with will. That counts more here than bullets. Ethan returned her gaze, humbled. You have saved more than my life. You've taught me the meaning of true strength. A pause fell, heavy with unspoken fears. But this chase is not done. I can feel it in my bones. Suddenly, a sharp crack rang out, perhaps the snap of a twig under heavy boot, or the distant report of a rifle shot. The group froze, alert, muscles coiling for flight or fight. They're closing in, Miguel said, voice barely steady. I saw the glint of steel past the ridge. The pursuers emerged from the sunlit mirage, a band of riders, masks of relentless menace smeared across their faces. Their leader, a scarred man with eyes cold and unyielding, scanned the landscape, hand hovering near his holster, the pistolero. Nayeli's grip tightened on her knife. Prepare yourselves, she whispered. This land will be our ally, or our grave. The chase twisted into brutal confrontation beneath the endless sky, dust swirling thick and choking, gunfire sparking like fleeting lightning across the cracked earth. Nayeli moved with quiet ferocity, shielding her children. As Ethan stood beside her, slowly shedding the doubts that once weighed him down, the desert witnessed their desperate dance of survival. Moments of narrow escape, cunning feints, and vicious bursts of resistance against the relentless hunters. Despite the chaos, something profound took root. A fragile bond woven through fire and blood. Ethan, once a stranger from distant riches, began to understand the heartbeat of the land and the fierce loyalty of a people who embraced him as one of their own. But cruel fate was never far. As dusk descended and shadows lengthened, the pursuers devised a deadly snare, an ambush set deep within a canyon's jagged embrace. Amid whispers and tense glances, the trap was sprung with brutal efficiency. Ethan, caught off guard while guarding the rear, stumbled into a hidden pitfall, a cage of twisted roots and sharp stones that shattered his already fragile strength. His cry of pain echoed through the narrow walls, chilling but brief. Nayeli's heart clenched as she rushed to his side, face pale but unbroken. The children gathered close, their eyes wide with fear, yet fierce with unyielding resolve. We cannot lose him now, Nayeli said, voice tight but certain. The cost is too great. She glanced at Miguel and Sol, who nodded silently, ready for whatever must come next. The desert wind carried away their breath, but the danger was far from spent. With Ethan gravely wounded, and their pursuers bearing down ever nearer, Nayeli faced the impossible. Their next move would be their most perilous yet. The survival of one man had become the fate of many, and as night folded over the land, a tense silence fell, broken only by the distant howling of coyotes and the slow, resolute footsteps of those who would never surrender. Long nights had given way to the first whispers of dawn, but the air remained tense, thick with unspoken fears. Nayeli sat close beside Ethan, her fingers tracing the edge of the worn leather pouch that hung around his neck. Inside, the weight of a secret, both dangerous and vital. He had revealed to her in a voice barely above a breath that he carried papers, documents, which named men of power and greed, figures who would burn down the land itself rather than lose their hold. The merciless pursuit was no mere chance encounter. It was a calculated hunt born from those hidden pages. Ethan's eyes met Nayeli's, flickering with shadows of guilt and hope tangled together. If they get those papers, it's not just my life at stake. It could bring ruin to many, including your people. Nayeli's gaze hardened, the fire of resolve igniting in her depths. Protecting Ethan had already thrown their fragile lives into chaos, but now the stakes were larger than she had imagined. The rustling fabric of the pouch carried a heavy burden, the potential to unmask corruption, peeling apart the very soil beneath their feet. The thought tightened her chest, yet she dared to believe such truth could break chains. Her children watched, wide-eyed and silent, sensing the gravity of the moment beyond their years. Miguel, eldest and bold, stepped forward, voice steady despite the tremor beneath. Then we fight for more than just survival. We guard that secret like our own blood. Ethan nodded, wincing as he shifted to ease the dull ache in his side. I owe you my life, and more. I never wanted this to drag you all into hell's reach. His voice cracked with remorse, but I swear I'll do everything to keep you safe. Nayeli's hand brushed his, a quiet pact sealed between two worlds previously divided. Honor means protecting what is sacred, not just gold or land. Here in this dirt and sky, it is trust. The fragile truce between them deepened, but the looming shadows were growing darker still. That peace shattered abruptly with the sharp sound of footsteps crashing through dried brush. Shouts calling Nayeli's name pierced the canyon's brittle silence. Her breath hitched, every muscle tensing. They've taken Soul, she whispered, voice breaking like a twig. A surge of icy dread swept over her as she looked to where her daughter's small hand had last gripped hers. The chilling realization struck hard. The attackers had chosen their leverage. Ethan sprang upright, despite the pain, urgency igniting his gaze. They want you to give yourself to them, to hand me over. Nayeli's heart clenched, rage and terror warring beneath her calm exterior. My children, my blood, they threaten what I hold most dear. They think that will break me. No, Ethan said fiercely. It will only make us fight harder. The others gathered quickly, the canyon walls echoing with whispered plans and frantic resolve. Miguel slipped a hand over Nayeli's, his youthful face set with a determined fire that belied his years. We won't let them win, not without a fight. Nayeli nodded, adrenaline coiling through her veins as she rose, eyes scanning for weaknesses, for allies, even the faintest. Chance of turning the tables. The risks clawed at her mind. Surrendering Ethan could mean safety, too fragile, too uncertain. But rescuing Saul meant plunging into enemy hands, into a trap layered with cunning and cruelty. Her spirit steeled by love and fierce loyalty, Nayeli answered the unspoken question burning in every eye. We save her, whatever it takes. Ethan's gaze locked with hers, bleeding respect and newfound loyalty. I will stand with you, even broken. I will fight for your family's freedom. A cold wind swept the canyon, as if the very earth exhaled a warning. The distant echo of horse hooves and cruel laughter hinted at the cruel game set by their hunters. The forested silence bristled with menace. Nayeli glanced once more toward the fragile shelter they'd built, now a dangerous beacon, and back. to her family. Every heartbeat thrummed with desperate hope and grave peril. "We will not bow," she whispered, voice low but unflinching. "Not while breath fills my lungs." The sun dipped behind distant rocks, bleeding the sky crimson as shadows deepened. The price of mercy was about to be tested, and the fate of many balanced on the edge of a knife. Above them, unseen eyes watched as the first captive was dragged into the twilight, her small hands clenched. A silent defiance burning bright in the gathering darkness. Nayeli stood beneath the towering cliff, the wind-swept canyon swallowing the whispered breaths of her small band. Her grip tightened on the bow slung across her back, fingers brushing the worn leather as a pulse rattled beneath. Beside her, Miguel and Sol balanced their father's frail weight between them, each step a careful negotiation of pain and resolve. Ethan leaned heavily on Nayeli's steady shoulder, every movement a testament to his stubborn will to live. The dry earth cracked beneath their boots, the sun burning relentless overhead. The air smelled of dust, sage, and distant thunder, a warning in the quiet. Nayeli's eyes scanned every ridge, every shadow, as though the land spoke in tongues only she could understand. The stakes had never been higher. "We move at nightfall," Nayeli whispered, voice low but edged with iron. The pursuers lose sight in darkness. Her gaze flicked toward Ethan, then to her children, shadows of fatigue etched upon every young face. Ethan met her eyes, gratitude mingling with frustration. "Every hour I waste, they close the noose tighter. I'm sorry to weigh so heavily on you all." Miguel shook, his head fierce. "You're not alone in this. We fight together." The eldest's words stirred a fragile warmth in Ethan's chest, shadows softening in his gaze. Nayeli's hand brushed his, a silent pact of defiance against the hunters who crept ever closer. At dusk, the canyon's jagged silhouette offered refuge. Nayeli crouched beside a scrub oak, eyes flicking toward the faint trail of horse hooves etched in dust. The dreadful certainty gnawed at her, a net tightening invisibly around them. Their camp was sparse, a few blankets, dried meat, and the stubborn flames of a small fire struggling against the chill creeping down the cliffs. Sol gathered twigs with meticulous care, eyes alight with determination despite her youth. Suddenly, a sullen voice grated from the rocks. "You're fools to hide here!" A figure emerged, Gale, a messenger darkened by wind and secrecy. His eyes held the cold calculation of a predator. The pistoleros no longer trailing shadows. He's near. And worse, your enemies have tightened their grip across the valley. Nayeli's jaws clenched. "What news do you bring that drags our fate deeper into this doom?" Gale's smile was a blade. "The Agiotas aren't content with forcing the cowboy out of the way anymore. They've captured Sol." The words hung like a plague. Silence swallowed the firelight. A cold pang pierced Nayeli's heart. Her gaze darted to where Sol last stood, now an empty space heavy with the weight of absence. "Why?" Ethan demanded, pain sharpening his voice. "Leverage. They want the woman who sheltered you to trade her child." Gale spat. "Their patience is gone. They want you both broken." A rage flared within Nayeli, fierce enough to scorch the desert floor. They think they can bend me with threats to my blood. They are gravely mistaken. Ethan struggled to rise, pain contracting his breath, but will sharpening his eyes. I've lived on the edge of ruin. I won't let this nightmare claim what I've been given. Not without a fight. Miguel stepped forward, the weight of his heritage carving every line of his young but resolute face. Then we must strike before they tighten their noose. We bring our people, friends of the clan who will not shrink from this battle. Nayeli nodded slowly, the fire of leadership sparking inviolate beneath her weariness. We prepare. Tonight, the hunters will learn that a mother, a child, and a wounded man can be fiercer than their darkest designs. Plans flickered between tired glances and taut voices. Whispered in the low rock shadows, the ragged group gathered every piece of knowledge and old alliances Nayeli had forged, hunters and scouts, kin and quiet allies of the Apache and the scattered settlers, all bound by the raw need to reclaim what was stolen. As the dusk deepened into night's shroud, preparations took shape. Nayeli's voice grew cold steel as she detailed their path. A daring strike at the enemy's camp, nestled beyond the ridge, where the captors held Soul. The risks were staggering. Traps awaited, and the men they faced wielded cruelty without measure. Ethan, despite his wounds, moved with determination. I will not let my life be a chain dragging you to ruin. I fight for her, your daughter, and for the honor you gave me. A silence fell, broken only by the crackling fire and distant coyote. Howls weaving through the canyon. In the dim light, Nayeli caught the flicker of hope in Miguel's eyes, steady like a flame that refuses to falter. Soul's fate, her freedom, was the heart they would fight to protect. Suddenly, a sharp rustle echoed beyond the firelight, a warning of movements too large and deliberate to be anything less than the advancing pursuers. Nayeli's lips pressed into a thin line, resolve hardening. They come. The time to act is now. Ethan gripped her hand, tenderness breaking through the veil of pain. Whatever comes, we face it together. The children closed ranks, their fear masked by courage born of survival. As the enemy's campfire flames flickered in the valley below like cruel eyes, a deadly silence settled, a breath held between worlds, where life and death danced precariously. The night grew dense with shadows, the first cries of battle still hushed in the folds of darkness. And then, as the moon carved pale paths through the canyon, the pistolero emerged from the blackness, a ghost with eyes like cold steel, ready to challenge Ethan in the duel that would seal their fates. Meanwhile, Nayeli squared her shoulders, steel flashing as she faced the Agiota's brutal leader, the one who held her child hostage. The war for Soul's freedom and their future was about to begin. The heavy noon sun beat down on a land scarred by countless footsteps and shifting loyalties. Yet beneath that merciless sky, Nayeli stood unbowed. Her eyes, fierce and resolute, scanned the rising dust clouds trailing across the mesa. Beside her, weary but unyielding, Ethan leaned heavily on her shoulder, each labored breath a reminder of his fragility and his recklessness. In trusting in others' mercy, the children, Miguel and Soul, moved silently, their youth overshadowed by the day's grim purpose. "We can't outrun them for much longer," Nayeli whispered, her voice raw with quiet urgency. "They know these lands now. Every stone, every path is no longer ours to hide behind." Ethan's jaw clenched, pain stitching through his shirt with each movement. "Then we fight where the earth bends in our favor." His gaze flicked, troubled and wary, to the narrow canyon entrance ahead, their last refuge. The children paused, exchanging quick glances burdened with a blend of fear and fierce determination. Miguel, clutching his carved wooden knife, nodded once. "The canyons swallow a man whole," he said softly. "We'll make sure they vanish here." Nayeli lifted a hand, silencing the whispered planning that stirred like the desert. "Wind. We split their strength. We don't meet fire with fire, yet. We draw them in till their fury turns on itself." They moved swiftly then, bodies low and cautious, threading through a jagged maze of sandstone, the sun casting grotesque shadows that danced like ghosts on the cracked earth. Each step was weighted with dread and hope intertwined. At a hidden cleft, Nayeli crouched beside Ethan, pressing a cool cloth to the cut at his side. "Your strength isn't just in muscle, Ethan. It's in your will to live, and that is something few possess." Ethan blinked into the talisman of her unwavering gaze, the stubborn pride melting into gratitude. "You gave me more than shelter. You gave me courage." Suddenly, the sharp crack of a twig fractured the tense silence. They froze, the pulse in their veins thundered like a war drum. From the ridge above, the harsh voices of pursuers sliced through the heat. "They're close," Miguel whispered, voice steady despite the tight coil of fear in his chest. "I saw their shadows, dark figures hunting the land." Nayeli's hand tightened around the familiar hilt of her knife. "Prepare yourselves. We do not run from death, but we use the land as our shield." The group crept toward a narrow ravine, the towering cliffs hemming them in like silent sentinels. The dry heat was broken here by cool, shaded air, heavy with the scent of creosote and ancient winds. The canyon walls seemed to lean in closer, as if eager witnesses to the unfolding battle. A sudden flurry of movement shattered the calm. The pistolero and his men appeared, grim and merciless, their eyes sharp as steel. Their guns aimed not just at bodies, but at hopes. Gunfire flared, the cracked earth trembling beneath pounding hooves. Nayeli moved with fierce precision, guarding her children as Ethan stood beside her, fighting not just for his life, but for the fragile trust they had spun between them. Dust churned, sweat stung in eyes, and the desert air grew thick with the scent of gunpowder and desperation. Each clash, every narrow escape, wove their bond tighter, Ethan's hardened pride slowly softening under the fierce loyalty of his unlikely allies. But fortune's favor is as fleeting as the desert rain. As dusk bled crimson across the horizon, the pursuers set a cruel snare deep within the canyon's embrace. Ethan, guarding their rear, faltered and stumbled into a pit, roots and jagged stones tearing at flesh and spirit. His anguished cry echoed off cold cliffs, chilling the marrow. Nayeli's heart clenched, yet her voice stayed steady. "Hold fast. We will not lose him, not to the earth, nor to shadow." Miguel and Sol gathered close, eyes wide but unbroken, embodying the fierce flame of survival that coursed through their blood. "We move at nightfall," Nayeli decided. before their noose tightens beyond breaking. Night's curtain had pulled tight when Ethan revealed the secret he bore. Not only flesh wounded, but a burden heavy with consequence. The worn leather pouch hung near his heart, whispered promises and deadly truths wrapped inside. He spoke with a voice hushed and ragged. "Those documents, I carry the names of men who would see this land burn before losing grip of their power. My enemies are no longer shadows, but storms." Gathering, Nayeli's gaze hardened, the fire of protection igniting in her belly. "We guard not just your life, but the future of all who call this land home." The children listened, their solemnity marking the weight of the pact. Miguel's voice broke the silence, steady and fierce. "We fight now for more than survival, for truth, for honor." Ethan nodded, a flicker of hope finding refuge amid the scars of doubt. "I owe you this fight, and more." Then the nightmare deepened. A sudden, violent intrusion shattered the fragile calm. Shouts pierced the canyon's hush, voices calling Nayeli's name with cruel urgency. "He's taken Saul," Nayeli's whisper broke, a shattered tremor woven through the words. Her heart cracked wide as she imagined her daughter's small hands gone from hers, trapped in unknown, merciless grasp. Ethan rose despite the weight of his wounds, eyes burning with fierce resolve. "They demand a trade, a mother for her child." Nayeli's gaze hardened like desert stone. "They mistake my love for weakness. They will learn the fierceness of a mother's rage." Miguel stepped forward, fierce as the rising wind. "We fight. We take back what is ours, no matter the cost." Plans were whispered beneath moonlight and stars, alliances forged in the crucible of desperation. Nayeli's voice rang cold steel as she detailed their strike, a daring raid beneath the enemy's very watch. Ethan's hand found hers, tender even as pain laced his fingers. Together, he vowed, for Saul and for all we hold sacred. Beyond the ridge, flickering campfires awaited, eyes shining cruel, hearts blackened by greed and ruthless ambition. And from the shadows emerged the pistolero, that ghost of steel and death, whose duel with Ethan would soon decide the fate of men bound by honor and blood. Meanwhile, Nayeli braced herself for the brutal confrontation with the Agiotas leader, the man who held her child hostage. The battle was set, the war not only for freedom, but for the very soul of the land they loved. The night deepened, thick with tension and the promise of fire. The war for Saul's life and their future was about to begin. The moon hung low and pale over the rugged canyon as Nayeli led the way through narrow shadows, her grip on Ethan's arm firm and steady. The night air was thick with anticipation and the distant rustle of restless winds. Each careful step echoed the weight of the moment. This was no longer merely a flight for survival, but a final stand for everything they held dear. Ethan's breath came in shallow gasps, pain flickering across his face, yet his eyes burned with renewed purpose. The leather pouch resting near his heart whispered its silent burden, the proof that had set this deadly chain in motion. Nayeli glanced at him, her fierce gaze softened by something beyond exhaustion. Hope. "We move quickly," she whispered, voice like the desert wind, quiet yet unyielding. "Every second counts. Saul's life depends on it." Miguel and Saul, though weary from days of flight, followed with a fierce determination born of love and desperation. Their youthful faces, gritty and resolved, mirrored their mother's iron will. Behind them, the canyon walls stood as tacit witnesses to a story etched with sacrifice and courage. As they approached the enemy encampment, hidden beneath the jagged cliffs, flickering, firelight spilled eerie shadows over the rocky ground. Nayeli's breath caught as cruel laughter echoed, a chilling reminder of the power that held her daughter captive. "They think chains and threats will break us," Nayeli said softly, tightening the bowstring in her hand. "But they've never faced the fury of a mother's love." Ethan, though weakened, squared his shoulders beside her. "I owe you my life," he said, voice steady, despite the ache that gripped his side. "Now I will repay that debt with every breath." The plan was clear, a daring strike to reclaim Seoul and shatter the hold of the ruthless Agiotas. Every ally they'd quietly gathered, every petty hope and fragile trust converged in this dangerous gambit. Under the cloak of night, the quiet pulse of impending battle thickened the air. Nayeli moved with practiced grace, her children mirroring her silent signals as they neared the edge of the enemy's fire. Suddenly, the camp erupted into movement. Shouts broke the stillness as the Agiotas scrambled for their weapons, the cruel pistolero among them, a shadow flickering cold steel under the moonlight. Ethan's hand found his rifle, the weight familiar and foreign all at once. Their eyes met, an unspoken promise bridging wounds and worlds. This duel would determine not only fate, but the fragile trust that had blossomed between them. The pistolero stepped forward, a grim specter of death, his scarred face unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. "Thought you could hide forever, cowboy?" His voice was a brittle blade, slicing through the night air. Ethan lifted his chin, pain sharpening his resolve. "I don't hide anymore. Tonight, honor and truth ride with me." Their weapons spoke in sharp echoes as bullets tore through the tense silence. Each shot carried the weight of years of fear, hatred, and the desperate thirst for redemption. Meanwhile, beyond the chaotic clash, Nayeli advanced on the wary Agiota leader who guarded the small, trembling figure of Seoul. Her bow sang a swift and deadly song, arrows finding marks with unyielding precision. The leader's confident sneer faltered as he tasted the fierce resolve tearing through his confidence. "I come for my child and my home," Nayeli declared, voice fierce and unbreakable. "You hold no claim here." A brutal fight ensued. Hands gripped, blades clashed, and the raw urgency of a mother's fury drove every strike. Time seemed suspended in the storm of violence, but Nayeli's strength shone like a beacon amid despair. At last, the leader fell, a defeated shadow crumbling into the dust. Seoul was freed, her small arms finding the fierce embrace of her mother. Tears and murmurs of relief mingled in the quiet that followed. Back at the duel, Ethan's steady aim and unwavering heart overcame the pistolero's lethal skill. When the final shot rang out, silence bloomed heavy before a breath of release. Ethan lowered his rifle, body trembling but spirit unyielding. The promise of survival, sacrifice, and honor hung thick between the scattered embers of battle. When Nayeli and Sol rejoined Ethan, the three stood united against the dawn's first light, a new family carved from hardship and hope. Ethan looked to Nayeli, gratitude shining deep in his eyes. "You gave me more than life. You gave me a future." Nayeli smiled, weary but proud. "You gave us trust, something worth fighting for, beyond blood or land." Miguel and Sol shared a glance, the bond forged in fire, unbreakable. Together, they faced the vast morning, the wounds of the past beneath them, but the road ahead unwritten. The land around them stretched wide and wild, a canvas of endless possibilities, where their combined footsteps promised a different tomorrow. In the merging light, the unity of Apache and Cowboy spoke of a hope rare and fierce, a future where respect overcame fear and family crossed boundaries drawn by history and pain. Though the threats that haunted them would linger in whispered shadows beyond the horizon, today marked a turning point. A new chapter, alive with the promise of peace earned through courage and compassion. As the sun climbed higher, Nayeli raised her eyes to the horizon, the weight on her shoulders lightened by the strength of those at her side. "The road ahead is long," she said softly, "but together we will walk it, as one." Ethan nodded, hope rekindled like a stubborn flame. "For the land, for the children, for the future we choose." Their story, born in hardship, found its end not in defeat, but in the forging of a new legacy. In that quiet morning light, the Apache widow and her children, alongside the once dying rich cowboy, became more than survivors. They became a family united by fate, choice, and the unyielding power of an unseen bond. And so the frontier breathed anew, carrying the promise of healing, unity, and the enduring strength of compassion, a fate forever altered by a single act of mercy.